Zeb, thanks so much, man, for hopping on the Next Level Minds podcast.
Chris, great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love that you're wearing the Masters green. What a day, what a weekend it was, right?
Scotty Scheffler for number two. That was pretty cool to watch. Would have been a little bit nicer to be there in person, maybe like you were, but I was watching it from my house and my TV, so I got to see all the footage, I guess, real time, but not real time, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy, like the pressure that he's under, and just to see like how he performs.
That guy, I mean, he was tied up on, I'm gonna get some of these holes wrong, right? He was like close to tied up on 8, 9, 7, 8, 9 at some point, and then he just broke away on the back. I think on nine, he put it within a few inches of the pin, and then just took off. And everybody else had, I mean, they made some mistakes. Colin, put it in the water. He said he got aggressive, but yeah, no doubt pressure. And that guy was like, I don't know. I couldn't play golf. Let me back up. When I play golf, and I'm not a very good golfer, I'm a mediocre golfer. But when I play, I bring my personality to the course. I mean, I like to cheer for people when they're doing well, and you'll hear me, yelling at my buddies. And Scotty Scheffler's out there, and he is just completely stoic. It's like
hmm
good shot, bad shot, doesn't matter. He's just zoned in. Didn't even look at the leaderboard a bunch of times, even though he's leading by like 3 or 4, 5 strokes. And I don't know. That's just kind of next level mind, almost robotic mindset, which you kind of need to have as a golfer, and something I probably couldn't do successfully just because I bring some energy, and that cuts both ways. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm landing on the green like 100 yards out, and I'm like, yeah, there we go. So,
I'm I'm that
yeah,
same guy. I mean, if I can hit a straight, clean, uh, any of my irons, and it gets on the green or even near the green, I mean, you'll get a hoot and holler out of me. So I'm pretty
for
happy
sure.
about that.
For sure, man. So I know you've had your hand in a ton of different industries. Your plate's obviously very full in a good way. I would love if you could just touch on your background a little bit. I know you grew up primarily in Arizona. And I know I heard you on another podcast mention that at first you didn't really take school seriously. And then obviously that pivoted a bit to you being at four different schools: Cornell, UF, Harvard, Duke. So, I would
Yep.
love if you could just touch on that a little bit to get us started.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've had a very unorthodox path where, I was very blessed to have a supportive family, emotionally and financially supportive of me as I was trying to find, my way. And I would tell anybody like, here I am at 44 years old, going to turn 45 in a couple of weeks. And, I'm still trying to find, whatever your way is. I just think you follow your passions until you're no longer passionate about them. And I've gone through and been able to either work or, in sports, sometimes train with some of the best athletes in the world, because I found it fascinating, or I went to schools and I got to go to some of the best schools in the world. So yeah, I graduated from high school in Phoenix, Arizona, got accepted early admission to Cornell, which is for those who don't know, is in Ithaca, New York. So Phoenix, Arizona to Ithaca, New York. That is a huge uh, climate change that I thought I was mentally prepared for. I was not. I did pretty well in school, but I froze. And at the same time, I was incredibly passionate about a sport called wakeboarding, which is like being pulled behind a boat and doing flips and tricks and all sorts of stuff. And I was actually at the time spending all my free time trying to get down to Florida, which was like the wakeboarding capital of the world with warm weather. And I'd get down there and train, and became friends with a bunch of guys who were really, really good in that space, some world champions. And uh, found myself at Cornell sitting in the library in January with my buddies loving their life, sitting on boats, riding wakeboards behind the boat, and realized that I think I wanted a little bit more from college than just only academics. And so I transferred to University of Florida against my parents' best wishes. My dad was actually pretty cool that my mom was like, "You're leaving an Ivy League school to go to the University of Florida." And I did. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever could have made. But it was like super risky. Like I had a ton of family members that were not happy about that sort of they looked at it as a step down.
Mm.
And in hindsight, it was, a great step forward, and enabled me to do a lot more. Got straight A's. Started volunteering for the Children's Hospital at the University of Florida. It's called Shands Children's Hospital. So I started volunteering, doing fundraising for them. We raised, I don't know, couple $100,000 in a dance marathon fundraiser as a junior and senior down there. And, I had straight A's, all this free time now because Cornell and Florida had different academic rigor standards, and um, got involved. I graduated, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, do you want to come work down on this lady's congressional campaign?" And so my next step was to go work for, at the time, I mean, I knew her, but I knew of her. She was the Secretary of State of Florida. So all you young folks that are listening to this, you're like, okay, I don't know what that means. This is a lady in 2000 who was basically put in the middle of the public and certainly the press sector, scrutinized the heck out of her. Her name is Catherine Harris. She was the Secretary of State of Florida during the 2000 presidential election, which basically meant she oversaw all these things that were like hanging chads. And she wanted to run for Congress, and offered me a position on her campaign to help her with her policy work. So yeah, it was even just getting there. Before she wrote my Harvard recommendation, she was a Harvard Kennedy School grad. Her chief of staff was a Harvard Kennedy School grad. Her outgoing chief of staff was heading to the Kennedy School at Harvard for his master's in public policy. And so we won the election. She liked obviously how I worked, and she wrote my recommendation, and I got in, and I was able to open her DC office for a couple of months and then headed off to Harvard for a master's degree. So, man, I mean, a lot of ping ponging around the world, but doing what I loved. I mean, what I was passionate about. People looked at me like, this seems a little unorthodox, and it truly was, but it was great. So yeah, I mean, you want me to keep going? I should probably, I'm going to try to quickly get us up to maybe where I am today, but where do you want me to go from here?
I just want to pause there for like a second, because you mentioned two things that really stuck out to me. One is you went from Cornell to Florida. You mentioned your dad was cool with it, but your mom was a little eh. So first question with that, like when people aren't really with you on your decision, but it's the right one, like how do you kind of continue going at it confidently without worrying too much about people's opinions? Because I think that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's like business too, right?
Yeah.
Like anywhere you are in your life, in your job, in the world, there's going to be dissenting opinions. And in my experience, it's actually really important to listen to dissenting opinions. Doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but if all you have around you are friends that, I guess what's the common term, like yes men, right? Like I happen to be a CEO. When I got my first CEO job, I had a leadership team around me. And if everybody was telling me the same thing, like, oh, that's a great idea, we got to do that. You might need to step back and reevaluate where you're getting your counsel from, because you don't want people who are telling you all the same things. Like you want diversity, you want the counterpoint. You want to have folks that are like, hey, I think this can go wrong over here. And then you can sit back and go, okay, well, let's analyze all this. If it's a decision on, whether to buy a company or sell a company, or make a marketing strategy go one way. For me at the time, I was young. I was like, I want to transfer out of Cornell to University of Florida. And my mom's like, hell no, you're not doing that. You're not leaving an Ivy League school for this party school of Florida. And I took that super serious, but I then still went and did it. I listened to her, and I would just give that same counsel to anybody. Like if you're in business and you've got teammates and executive team members around you, like find dissenting opinions so you make sure that you're really thinking through all the ins and outs. Because if you ever have a super easy decision, it's almost like one of those moments where you're like, the tough ones should have some good debate around them, and they should. So yeah, I mean, that's my advice for all your listeners out there is, don't surround yourself with all yes men or women. Surround yourself with people who have diverse perspectives so that you make sure you're really thinking about things thoroughly.
Yeah, no, I love that, because if you're not thinking about it thoroughly, like you can get yourself into trouble or make the wrong decision, or who knows what. So,
well, I mean, I'll give you another great example. Like one of my partners in our fund, Gem Funds, is a great guy, lives in South Carolina here. He's actually had a fantastic transformation over the last couple of years, but for a long time, he was always like the no guy. He was the guy on the team as partner who would tell you all the reasons things would go wrong. And sometimes that's super frustrating. You're like, oh my gosh, Sully, like, come on, like, all right, let's think about this. But it was first of all, number one, he always came from a place of positive intent. So
Mm.
I never had to question his integrity. I never had to question whether or not he was wanting us to be successful. That was never an issue. It was always just around like he had seen enough in his life to realize that things don't always go as you expect. So how do you think around all the problems that can occur so that you're making the best decision possible? And I think that's super valuable. So for everybody out there, find someone, be it a mentor or a friend or a work colleague, and get dissenting opinions as you're thinking through things, because it'll only help make your thought process, your logic, and your execution better.
Yeah, I also feel like for your like significant other too, having somebody that can
Whoa, whoa,
like
whoa!
help you out
I'm not sure I want to go that far. You know,
because like for me, I'm very like, let's go, let's go, let's go. And then my wife's like, let's think about this decision a little bit. And
oh my
to have
gosh,
that counsel helps me out a lot. But
no, no doubt.
friends of mine are all like, let's go, let's go, let's go. And then we're like, wait a second, like let's chill out for a second. So I think I think
My,
that's a really interesting perspective.
you have to. I mean, look, it's personal life too. It's no different.
Yeah.
You need a partner who can balance you. Like if I get super excited about something, you know, I want, like my wife Barbara, I want her to be excited about it. But if she's got reservations, I want her to be comfortable sharing those.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear so many stories about leaders who surround themselves with folks who aren't comfortable sharing a dissenting opinion, and what's that called, groupthink.
Mm.
I mean, that's a very real experience in leadership, and it often comes from folks who are intimidating, who like to govern with a little bit of with or maybe not a little bit, a lot of dominance, and they don't invite that. And I think that can create for some poor decision making as
Yeah.
a group.
Yep. So, all right. So you got the Harvard letter of recommendation. You're helping out on the with the Secretary of the state of Florida,
Yep. She
and
she wins. I got accepted to Harvard. I went to the Kennedy
got it.
School of Government for a master's in public policy, which is essentially a master's in government. And it was awesome. I was we jokingly said at the time, there were, I don't know, 150 or so odd people in our Kennedy School class, and I was one of 8 or 10 Republicans, which was fascinating because Harvard's generally viewed as a fairly
Yeah.
liberal school. And of course, I knew that going up there, but it wasn't. I never felt any sort of pressure. And there's some press stories that have come out in the last couple of years where people are like, talking about either safe spaces or, they can't voice their opinions. That wasn't what I experienced at all. I experienced a classroom where people wanted to hear dissenting
Mm.
opinions. They wanted to have vigorous debate. We didn't always agree on stuff, but it was they would turn to me and my other 8 or 10 Republican colleagues, and we would stand up and have a healthy conversation about stuff. And I don't know how, maybe that got lost somewhere along the ways, but that wasn't the case for us. We would have that, and we could treat each other with great respect, and we'd go out and have beers or drinks and dinner and stuff afterwards, and we were friends, and it was awesome. But it helped me, and it forced us as the minority Republicans of this group. It forced us to really know our stuff, because if you
Mm.
stood up there and said something that was stupid or wrong, the entire classroom came down on you, and came down on you hard.
Yeah.
And nothing is more humbling than saying something stupid and being called out for it, and realizing you're like, yep, I'm going to make sure next time I open my mouth, I really have my facts right. So yeah, Harvard was a great experience. Loved it. Would do it again in a heartbeat. Uh, Came back to Sarasota, Florida at the time. Actually, let me stop there. I can keep going on my
Yeah. Yeah. No,
kind
please
of
do.
career trajectory. So I came back to Sarasota, Florida, where I worked for Catherine in her congressional campaign. Started working. The biggest issue at the time, this is 2005 to 2008, and the biggest issue at the time was affordable housing. Real estate prices had gone through the roof. Employees were not able to find places for, employers were not able to find places for their employees to live nearby, which was causing a whole bunch of problems. So I spent almost 2 full years volunteering full-time pro bono at Habitat for Humanity, helping them build affordable housing developments and master plan out some affordable housing communities. And um, it was really, I'd always had some fun mentors, like be it with sports and wakeboarding. One of my best buddies was a guy named Travis Moy. He was like a, world champion slalom skier and trick skier. I got to see how that industry was. And when I got to Sarasota, Florida, I was able to meet some unbelievable mentors in my life. One of them was the CEO of Tropicana, which was a
Mm,
PepsiCo company at the time, a guy named Brock Leach. Um, had lived and run this, multi-billion-dollar company, retired, still lived in Sarasota. He was our chairman of the board.
mm,
And, Brock kind of, I wouldn't say he took me under his wing, but he was there for me. He was very kind and gracious with his time and super smart. And, at Habitat, we navigated a lot of challenges. I mean, economic challenges where prices were rising, then later prices started falling. We were doing fundraising. Habitat was this really unique business model because they had fundraising, they had volunteers that built their houses, but they still had an entire construction department. So you still got to build these things with professionals. Um, they had their own mortgages. So they were
mm.
actually a mortgage company as well. And on top of that, they had a retail store where people could bring their old household items, be it like, desks and chairs and fans and whatever, and have rather than throw them out, Habitat would take them in and then resell them to people. They called it Restore. And so they had this, and I got thrown into this organization that had like almost six working divisions of it.
Yeah.
And I eventually ended up running it for them over a period of time. Now, at the same time, I was making some commercial real estate investments, some of which were awesome. And we'll talk about one here that was a gigantic train wreck in hindsight. Um, but for anybody who lived through it, it was 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. And then when Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, like the financial world, we were all living through it, was like, you didn't know if we were going to wake up and like the entire global financial ecosystem was going to collapse.
Mm.
And were we going to start living in caves and bartering with like chickens and goats again? I mean, it
Yeah.
was really scary at the time.
Yeah.
Super scary at the time. So, and I was trying to finance it. I was a minority partner in a real estate project trying to get financing done at the time when all this stuff went absolutely sideways. And it was a complete disaster. Um, so let's stop
So
there. We can go into as much detail on that as you want, but I got to live through it. I spent 2 years in litigation unwinding everything. It was,
dang.
it was like total brain damage. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but the litigation process, look, if you want to be a CEO, and I'll tell this to anybody, if you want to be a CEO, you want to run a complex organization and you have not been through litigation or had litigation experience, like that's almost a prerequisite for you to be able to navigate corporate America because
Mm.
it is stressful. There's a massive amount of strategy. You need to have a certain mindset when you approach it. And it's inevitably going to happen to you if you're going to take any sort of leadership responsibilities in business. Like, hey, you're going to have a contractual dispute, or you're going to have really bad partners, or you're going to have all these things that are going to happen. And so litigation is, you try to avoid it every step of the way if you can, but it sometimes has to happen. And in hindsight, really the only people who win in litigation are the lawyers. So it
Yeah.
may be your only route. But anyway, been there, done that, learned a lot. Don't recommend it, but it's part of business.
So you're doing this like big real estate project, and I assume like you're still kind of learning a bit as you're going,
Oh
and
man,
then this
yeah,
all happens
for
and
sure.
unravels. Like, so how did you even?
Well, let me give
Pro-
you some more context around kind of what led up to this. So I
yeah.
was a small investor. At the time, we didn't know which hotel brand we wanted to put on there. I mean, the real estate market in Southwest Florida is insane. This is
Mm.
2006. And I was a small minority investor. I think I had maybe 15 or 20% of the deal at the time. Um, and we had found this amazing hotel partner, a real genius in the space named Alan Ostroff, and he had run Prudential's multi-billion-dollar hospitality portfolio, and he was kind of the godfather of hospitality and hotels. And Alan came on as a partner, and the two main folks were they were developing it. I mean, I'd never developed anything like this, like absolutely not.
Yeah.
And You want to talk about government, public policy? Like I could advise on that. I could help us secure permits, which I did, and all those things. But when it came to pulling together the parts, signing a hotel flag, we inevitably eventually signed Waldorf Astoria. We would have been the second Waldorf Astoria in the United States after the one they put in Orlando, and which was a huge coup for us in a
Yeah.
small town, smaller town like Sarasota, Florida. So we had all these great things that were lining up to it, but I didn't know how to sign a hotel contract and the ins and outs of that. Alan took care of that. I mean, I'd never financed a development of this magnitude or designed anything like that. Like the two other partners, a guy named Gary and his wife Karen, they were the ones who were doing that. And I just had some money in the deal. And then turned out we needed some more funds, so I put some more money in the deal. Then it turned out that the two main folks just when things went sideways, they had a bunch of other real estate projects and they got in trouble and
Mm.
they couldn't contribute. The real estate market in general was falling apart. And rather than in hindsight, what I should have done is just walked away.
Yeah.
Instead, I said, hey, let me try to take over and finance this if I can. And again, that was in 2008 after Lehman collapsed. I tried to salvage it in 2008, 2009, couldn't. Spent 2 years kind of unwinding everything and in litigation and came out successful at the end, but it was not without a ton of pain and a lot of attorney's fees along the way. So yeah, I mean, I guess if one of my big learnings aside from the litigation standpoint is, if you've got resources and you're sitting down trying to evaluate where to put them, just make sure you're diversified.
Mm.
It's okay to make bets, but realize that sometimes you think those bets are going to happen, and then you can have a black swan catastrophic event. For us, that was, the financial collapse of 2008, 2009. Um, you know, I had friends who were trying to IPO their businesses, and then COVID happened, and
Mm.
they couldn't get back from that. So, all the best planning, all the best partners and team members, and at the end of the day, like sometimes you're better off lucky than smart, and timing matters. It really matters. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And I'm like kind of doing the math because you said you're turning 45. So what, you were probably like 29, 30
I was
when
30 years old,
yeah, it's like
trying to
wow.
salvage a billion dollar
Jeez.
real estate project where I had absolutely no business trying to do that. But I had no choice. It was either like we were given the option of walk away and just write the whole thing off or try. And I'm a Taurus, right? I'm born in May. I'm like my best and worst attribute in the world, Chris, is my sense of urgency when it comes to
Mm.
things. And so I was like, no, I'm gonna do everything I can. I'm gonna leave it all on the table as best I can to make sure at least we tried to salvage it, and we couldn't. So
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately, it came out that way, but we also had major headwinds, global headwinds we were facing that just were insurmountable.
For sure. It wasn't like you guys like jumped too far into the wrong direction and you were the only one. Like it was everyone was dealing with this whole global crisis. But I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like you've kind of extracted a lot of these learning lessons and probably still kind of use some of the things that you took from all the litigation and trying to unwind it, and kind of thankful for that at the end of the day, outside of the exuberant attorney fees and all
Well,
that
you
stuff.
got to get
But
past it a couple years to
yeah.
realize the value it creates, um, and no, it's no fun at the time. But I went on, I got my MBA, went to Duke, got an MBA, and ended up going back and working. I kind of jokingly say it's a family company. Like I'm, we still own stock in it, but Eli Lilly's a big pharma company out of
Mm.
Indiana. I haven't had a family member who'd worked there in years or decades, but I had family who had worked there for a really long time. And I told my mom, I'm like, I want to go learn about what the family helped build. And so I went and worked
Mm.
in pharma. When I got there, I was like, I'm the only person in anywhere near my peer group who had these sort of like, I wouldn't say crisis management, but like litigation experience, general business experience. I was sitting in meetings thinking about things, almost like a CEO. That's probably not CEO of Lilly because that's a huge company, but like I just had an owner mentality as opposed to like a, um,
Employee.
brand manager
Yeah.
mentality, and it was really cool. I got to do things and see things and accomplish things that a lot of people otherwise weren't able to do, which is why I inevitably got offered a job, and I never thought I was going to leave Lilly. Chris. I thought I'd be there for 30 years. I should be calling you from Indianapolis right now.
Yeah.
But I gotta, and we can talk about this in a second. I had a good friend of mine I served on a nonprofit board with who said, Zeb, I want to put your name in the ring for this CEO job. It's based out of a company in South Carolina. It's for a family in Switzerland. They're large in manufacturing. They want to put another couple $100 million into their plant for a plant expansion, but they need a new CEO. They don't have anybody in their succession plan, and I want to put your name in the ring. You'll be one of 130 applicants for this job. He was the headhunter in charge of it, and so he did, and I agreed. And after 3 months of interviews and a bunch of questions and a couple trips around the country and one to Switzerland, they asked me to become their CEO. And so I left Lilly thinking I was never going to do that. Um, and I still look back and say that was one of the best places I ever worked. The
Mm.
culture, the people, the mission, the family connection, all those things. Like if my wife didn't hate the cold, I would go back and work at Lilly for $1 a year.
Wow.
That's how much I loved it.
Wow.
Those people everything about it was just awesome. But
Yeah.
my wife does hate the cold, and we live in South Carolina now because I
Yep.
took that job working for the family in Switzerland. So that's
Yeah.
anyway, I just covered a lot there. Let's double click on any of that stuff you want to.
Yeah. So a couple things there. Um, when you shifted from like real estate to pharmaceuticals, right? I know you mentioned you had some family ties and all that, but like,
Yep.
how did you go about kind of like mastering that industry, whether it was like from policy work to real estate to farm? Because
Sure.
that's pretty impressive,
Yeah.
honestly.
Great. No, no. Well, and so I mean, thank you for saying the word impressive. If I was reading my own resume and I was trying to go through it, I look at it and go, dude, you are jumping around to a lot of stuff. Like this just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I'm sorry, Zeb, you don't get to like I'm not hiring you. Like there's just you've covered. I feel like you're going to be out of here in 2 years,
Mm,
and so that would be my reaction if I was reading my own resume as a hiring manager. Now, for me, it was a little different because I grew up with Lilly. I had read, all the biographies and autobiographies of the family. I knew about the Lilly Endowment. I knew about the company itself, and so what I did was I took my Harvard experience. When I worked for Catherine, I handled all of her healthcare policy, both
mm,
on her campaign as well as in DC when we opened her DC office. So I had a really good understanding or a decent understanding of Medicare, how Medicare Part D, when it got passed, how that worked, healthcare policy in general. Uh, and I was able to take that, couple it with a MBA from Duke, and and when you look at real estate, real estate's just building a project. And in many ways, in pharma, each molecule you're working with is like building a project. Now,
mm,
granted, your financing mechanisms are a little different, but eventually you need to go and you need to, find out what the attributes of that are, and you need to sell that to the public. And you need to sell that to doctors or direct to consumer or whatever your policy. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, in many ways, marketing is marketing. There's a lot of similar features across different industries. So I was able to take a lot of previous experience and learnings and transition it over. General management experience, managing team members, not realizing, not thinking you can show up and let me see how I want to say this instead. It's being able to influence people to do things without asking them to straight up do them,
mm.
right? That is a hugely powerful skill that, if you reported to me and I was like, hey, I need this report by 2 o'clock tomorrow. It's one thing for me to walk up to you, Chris, and be like, hey, man, that report's due at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Like, you're going to get it done, right? Versus, hey, just check, like it's the soft side of things, like just checking in. We've got the presentation we got to take care of by Friday. This time, it'd be great if I could have an access to that.
Mm,
How long do you think you need to get it done, right? I'm kind of thinking through this
yeah.
and bring them along so you don't have to be. This is just my style, and it's not right for everybody, but I'd rather, you know, softly bring somebody there as long as you can meet your same timelines and goals versus just be like straight up black and white, 2 o'clock tomorrow, get it done. And Lilly was very much a culture like that. And so being able to influence people without having direct influence over them there's an art to it. And figuring that out is, if you can do that well, it'll pay you dividends for the rest of your life, because corporate America has a lot of that going on.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it tying it back to the broader mission, or like how does that? Because I feel like unfortunately a lot of people are a bit lazy now, and it's like it's by Friday, and then they turn it in late on Friday. Like, how do you get them motivated without being like, do this by 2, or we're gonna have a conversation about it?
Yeah, I mean, you got to know your teammates,
Right.
um, because they all are going to have different attributes and different personalities and work ethics and everything. So sometimes you will have to have the people you're like, hey, I need
Mm,
this by 2. Um, Other times you just got to help them explain the big picture of things, right? Like, hey, we've got this, presentation to the president of Lilly USA, for example, and we should all have our eyes on it. We're gonna have a meeting next Tuesday at this time. Can we make sure the draft is out by everyone? So then they know that everyone's being held accountable, and you got to get your work done. Because if you don't, you're gonna look really bad in front of a whole bunch of folks. Sometimes it's external pressure that gets them to get there. I mean, sometimes it's praise, as simple as, first time they do a really good job, giving them some public praise in a way that, if that's what really motivates them, do that a couple of times. And next thing you know, they're going to be the first ones leaping through, even raising their hand saying, give me more. I want more. I want to take on more. Like, I love these challenges. So everyone's different. You just got to know who you're working with. Some of these personality tests that are out there, like, there's one called a Hogan analysis. I think those are, they can be really good if used with a real facilitator to kind of educate folks. 360 feedback, I think, has
mm.
served really well for me in the organizations I've worked in, because you can get a sense of, leaders can get feedback about themselves that they might otherwise be blind to. Going back to, people may not want to be speaking truth to power. So you can get that through a 360 feedback. And so I think there's a lot of mechanisms, but you got to know your team. Like, if you're just
Mm.
going to mail it in and not know who you're working with, like, yeah, you're probably always going to get mediocre results if you do that.
Yeah, I loved what you mentioned there about like knowing your team, knowing the personalities, knowing what drives the key, employees within that organization, because maybe extra time off is like an incentive that people like, and then maybe person B is like, I really don't care about that. I'm 22. I'm just trying to grind. It's like, well, maybe more money is what they
Money,
want. So
promotions, send
yeah,
them there's a seminar somewhere in a nice
yep,
place. I mean, if you don't take the time to know what makes your teammates or your people that report to you tick, like, how do you know how to motivate them? So
yeah,
that's, everyone's different. So it's, you got to have a good pulse around that. And then, by the way, there's nothing wrong with, like, even coming out and asking them, hey, what drives you? Like, is it this or is it that? Like, if I did this, well, would you find that more valuable? Or if I did that, would you find that more valuable? Like, that's a perfectly good conversation to have with folks, because one, it means, you know, they as long as you're coming at it authentically, like, they'll realize that you care.
yeah.
And that goes a long way. There's an awesome book. I forget I got it on my Kindle. Um, which is like an iPad for all you young folks out there. So,
That's funny.
haha, I'm dating myself,
Is it
but it's
start
about
with why or
servant
no?
leadership. I mean, it's
Oh
all
yeah,
about,
what is it?
there really shouldn't be anything you ask. In my opinion, anything I ever ask anybody to do, I need to be willing to do myself. I may not have the
Mm,
competencies to do it. Like, we've got a CFO. I can't do the CFO's job because he's just
right.
really good at that level of financial analysis and closing books and all that stuff. I can't do that. I can understand them when they're done, but so, being able to serve your people and ask them consistently, like, how can I help you? What are your
Mm,
problems? What barriers can we try to break down for you today? You ask those things to people, and 90% of the time, that's really all they want to hear. Now, you got to be able to be willing to stand behind that. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need this or I need that, like, yeah, you should go to work and try to solve that. But so you can't just ask and not be authentic in your delivery. But most of the time, that's what your employees want to hear. They just want to know that you care and you're there for them
Mm.
if they give them the latitude to do their job and then step back and support them when they need it.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, giving them the autonomy, but then just giving them that outlet that you're listening, because I feel like a lot of people just want to be heard, whether you're an employee or not. I think that's something that all people value.
Now, there's a lot of school of thought around, employee policy where you're just every year you're weeding off and whacking off the bottom
Mm.
10% of performers. Um, I'm I'm not fully opposed to that. It's not really my style. I'd rather try to find a way to put people on performance plans and get
Yeah.
them to work up. But I do see the rationale behind that, and I see how that can really work well for some people. So, um, like Chris, have you read? There's a great book by Walter Isaacson. He wrote Steve Jobs' book, but he wrote a book, kind of a biography on Elon Musk. Any chance you've
Mm. No,
read
I
that or
haven't.
listened to it? Oh, dude,
Uh-uh.
it's awesome. It's awesome. So I'm gonna make two plugs for
Please do.
well, actually three. I'm gonna make three plugs for things that I consume pretty
Mm.
regularly that I thought were just super inspirational. So the Elon Musk book by Walter Isaacson is amazing. Now, Elon Musk comes across a lot of times as a complete jerk. I get that. Like you gotta take that for what it's worth and set that aside. And I'm going to say, I don't think there's anybody on the planet right now who has done more for humanity from a scientific
For sure.
standpoint than that man. Um, so take the fact that he might treat people a way that I wouldn't do. His leadership style is nowhere near mine, but that man is launching rockets to space and having them re-land on a platform. And he was the only one in the world that did that. I mean, NASA couldn't do it. All the contractors, Boeing and everybody with NASA couldn't do it. Like that man figured out the physics by just grinding at it, and he had to be tough on people to get there. And he's been able to get amazing results. So I'd say anybody who's listening, like pick up that book. If you're in the grind, if you think when people tell you we got to go this way, like you'll find story after story
Mm.
after story of Musk in his life when everybody said it's supposed to be this way, and he's like, F that. We're going to go this way because he would go back and question like first principles. If it's not against the laws of physics, we should be able to figure this out. And obviously he has. And he's got, what, 5 portfolio companies. He's
Yeah.
putting chips into people's heads so that people without control of anything else besides like breathing and their eyesight can now move and play video games and like move computer parts. Like Neuralink is he's just got so many awesome things that he's broken down barriers for the betterment of humanity. Like read that book, everyone. It is truly inspiring. So that's number one. Got to do that. Number two, there's a global political economist named Peter Zion.
Mm.
He has written probably 4 or 5 books. His most recent one is The End of the World is Just the Beginning. He talks about the rise and fall of civilizations and the factors that enable them to both rise and then inevitably fall. And one of his big things that's I think happening right now is like China. He said this in his book. He's like, China is doomed to fail. The decision was made 30 years ago, and there is nothing that anybody can do about it. And it's entirely about their demographic trends. When they put their
Mm.
one-child policy in place,
Oh, yeah.
they, they were projected to fall off a cliff demographically. You can't have a society exist as it exists today with having, a huge population that's elderly and very few that are able to support them. So Peter Zion is the next person, and then the third one is a competing podcast for yours, Chris.
Yeah.
Is a group called the All In Podcast
Oh,
with
yeah.
four. I guess they're all billionaires, probably. If not, 3 out of the 4 of them are billionaire entrepreneurs who just sit down and talk about politics and leadership and science and technology and what's going on in Ukraine. And I listen to them religiously every week, and I'm inspired every time I listen to those guys. They're the best. They don't shy away from tough conversations. They debate things rigorously as they should, which I think is being is missing in a lot of discourse across our country, and I love it. And you don't have to agree with them, but at least they're not going to shy away from a tough conversation, and they'll give you all the news that I think is important for the week. Those guys hit it. It's so cool. So anyway, for all your listeners, if you didn't ask me, but I'm just putting it
No,
out
I'm glad
there.
you did.
The three best folks are those three. Like Elon Musk in his work ethic and strategy and problem solving, Peter Zion for global political trends, and then the All In podcast guys for basically, week by week everything that's going on in the world. They're
Yeah,
the
man,
best.
I've listened to All In a few times. They're a bit lengthy for me. Like I love the topics that they cover, and I think it's important to know that. But I love like their premise because it's just them talking about everything that's happening in the world and kind of staying updated. And like you need to have those tough conversations. Like I think the world is where it is right now because people haven't had those tough conversations. And
Well, sure, and like, look, uh, uh, here you go. They had Tucker Carlson on, and again, I think well, I don't think I shared with you earlier. I'm a Republican. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I just have certain beliefs about smaller government
for
and
sure, we're
fiduciary
on the same
responsibility.
boat there. By the way, most listeners are that are listening, so you're in
And
good
so,
company.
but yeah, and these guys, they brought on Tucker Carlson, and I was like, man, everything I've heard about him, and I've watched some of his shows, and I was like, I'm just not sure what to think. But of course, I'm going to listen. And I thought he did a fantastic job, and he was very, very thoughtful. And even the folks that lean a little left on the All In podcast were very impressed by the way Tucker presented himself. And I was telling a friend of mine who is left leaning and probably pretty far left leaning, I was like, hey, you should listen to this podcast. I think it does a really good job of just kind of giving some more color around who Tucker is and how he thinks about things. And my buddy, who's a really close buddy, was like, absolutely not. I would never listen to him. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of
Yeah.
that's the problem we have in this country is like, I'm not saying you need to agree with them. Look, I don't agree with Alex Jones, but I still listen to like Tucker's interview of Alex just because I was like, I want to understand maybe a little bit more where he's coming from.
Mm.
I think some of it is completely batshit crazy, and I will never agree with it. But I'm not opposed if somebody sends me something that they say is thoughtful, regardless of my political affiliation, and I like and trust that person. Like I should listen and formulate my own opinions. Like saying something is completely off is like I just won't even give it the time of day. I just think that's so unfortunately short-sighted. So,
Agreed, agreed. And it's like I think you should be able to share those opinions without people, for lack of better words, kind of freaking out about it.
well, and
Um,
Chris, it goes back to like we were just talking about dissenting opinions. Like you're on
yeah,
a team of people. Um, you don't want a bunch of yes men,
for sure.
groupthink folks, or yes men and women, groupthink folks sitting around telling you all the things that you like. No, you want folks to think through a situation, like having a diverse perspective and a diverse team. And that's not just like ethnically diverse. There's diversity in economic background and education and obviously gender and you can have and ethnicity. I mean, like of course you can have all the major things, but like just have different styles of thinking.
Yeah,
And because I promise you, diverse teams end up making better decisions and think creatively about solutions in ways that monolithic thinking teams just can't get there.
yeah,
So
yeah. I agree because then you're kind of in that like tunnel vision per se versus having some outside perspectives. And yeah, I think it's really important. And you've probably seen that a lot in the different industries that you've had your hand in. Which so you talked about how you bounced around a lot, which I think is funny because you're just laughing at yourself of how you went from like the political side to real estate to manufacturing, and then is that jumping from manufacturing to more of the alternative asset space with gym
yeah,
mining
so
and gym
so
fund
I
or
can't yeah, so I actually ended up moving to Switzerland, lived there for two
oh wow.
years, loved it. It was 2018. There was some really important tax legislation that got passed, something called opportunity zones were
Mm,
passed. Senator Scott here, where I live in South Carolina, was instrumental in passing these opportunity zone legislation components. And so that was really impactful for me and my family and a couple of YPO colleagues of mine who were having exits or had some capital gains. And so I decided I'm going to move back to the United States. Uh, Came back from Switzerland, had been running a large operation. I think I had 12,000 employees and subcontractors
wow.
across four continents, and it was awesome. And I loved it, and I loved the team, and I loved the mission, and I loved the people. But I needed to come home for my family purposes, but also it was time for me to come back. So I came back, and we started our own private equity group, and partly because of opportunities in legislation, but also we just sat back and said, let's find out what makes us excited and try to get in that space. And I had a diverse YPO group of partners who some were in financial services. One was the leading Bitcoin miner in the world and building that company. I had invested with him back in 2017, so I can talk about Bitcoin mining and
Mm.
as much granularity as you want. We've got a really interesting event happening in about 5 days called the Halving,
Hmm.
which is, I think, great for Bitcoin and challenging for Bitcoin miners. I'll walk you through that if you want in a second. But I had this, one of our partners was in real estate development and hospitality, another one in construction. And so we created this, my background was, I guess, manufacturing experience, overall CEO and general management. So we created a group called Gem Funds and started investing in spaces that made us excited. And one of the first areas we got into, which is a project that I'm working like if you ask me what I do most of my day, I'm finishing up my YPO chairman year for YPO 77, which is a leadership group. I'm happy to talk about. But if I'm not spending maybe 20% of my day, 15% of my day thinking about that, the other 75, 80, 90% is dedicated to high-tech agriculture, which means greenhouses, tomato greenhouses specifically. We've had the United States and the East Coast here in Charlotte, so 90% of all your tomatoes right now come from Mexico, Canada, or California. And we've partnered with one of the largest tomato operators, greenhouse operators in all of Europe. And the Europeans are the best in the world at growing things inside controlled environmental agriculture like a greenhouse. So we partnered with one of the largest groups in the world called Harvest House to bring some of their expertise to the United States to grow so they can grow tomatoes here instead of having to ship them in from Mexico or California. We can grow them locally, pesticide free, and be able to put them within 24 hours on a supermarket shelf. So a guy like you and me, any one of us can eat them within 24 hours instead of shipping them in 7 or 10 days from a place like California. If I knew this project was going to be this complicated, I probably still would have done it. But man, sure would have liked to have known in advance, Chris, what I was walking into, because all the moving parts, we had USDA loan guarantees and state incentives we had to finalize, and interest rates have basically doubled in the last year since we got our loan guarantees, and construction costs have gone up. So I've had to mitigate all those issues, which we did and have done. And so, yeah, I mean, I can get into as much granularity around tomato greenhouses and tomato operations. Like at some point, once we break ground here and hopefully in the next 2 months, 60 days ish, I want to go live in a greenhouse in the Netherlands and just watch them as they, go through
Awesome.
trimming plants and doing nutrient analysis for each one of the plants. And, I just, living in there and learning exactly how they grow these tomatoes that are so successful and the margins are fantastically good. So that's where I spend most of my days. But we also, before this, had some partners. We built a Bitcoin mining operation called Gem Mining. And it's not come without its own challenges. I mean, we watch Bitcoin prices meteorically rise and then meteorically fall, as we saw FTX implode and the Terra Luna stablecoin implode. And so, yeah, I don't know which one of those you want to. We can talk about all or none. Where do you want to go? I'll give
Yeah.
you as much granularity as you want.
Man, that's a lot to unpack there. I think
Mhm.
well, first off, I didn't know all the intricacies that went into like growing tomatoes in this case, as just a normal citizen, you're like, I go to the store, I get the
Yeah,
tomato, and yeah, so
that's right. I walk
um
in, I'm like, I'm just going to grab a
y-
tomato. You
yeah,
didn't go, just so next time you do, go walk over and check where your tomatoes are coming from. And I promise you, they're nowhere
yeah,
near us.
yeah.
They're coming
Agreed.
from, and oftentimes, I mean, Canada and Mexico, they're being imported from other countries. Okay. So yeah, huge opportunity in the high tech ag space. Not, take away the side of things like, yes, growing in a greenhouse is 90% more water efficient than growing
Yeah.
outdoors. Sure, that's super valuable. Being able to grow year round, not having to trek it across the country, all sorts of valuable things. But yeah, there's a lot of granularity that goes into
Y-
high-tech agriculture.
Yeah. So let's talk about that first. It seems like you guys just kind of started this because there's a huge problem out there.
Well, I'll tell you the
And
exact.
like, I would kind of
It's
love to
not
hear
like
like a
I
deeper
didn't wake
reason
up
though.
one day, Chris, and go, man, turn
I
to my
love some
partners and go,
tomatoes.
we want to get into the high-tech agriculture tomato space. Here's exactly what happened. And it's kind of a story of just how public service in any capacity whereby you can do it. For most of us, that's like serving for a nonprofit or being lucky enough to serve on a nonprofit board of directors. I mean, the highest level is, running for office in some capacity and serving your community, but public service is a noble calling. I still believe that, despite, what some of our politicians sometimes say and do. But for nonprofit boards, like some of the best people I've ever met, my first CEO job came because I served on a nonprofit board of directors and got to know some people really well through that. When I was here in South Carolina, I was on a nonprofit board of directors for a group called the Southern Carolina Alliance, which represents the poorest 7 counties, if you will, in South Carolina, doing all the economic development work for that because our plant for the family in Switzerland was located there. And I got to know a great guy named Danny Black really well, who runs that and still runs that. And when I came back from Switzerland a couple of years later, I went and met with Danny. I was like, hey, man, tell me what you're working on. There may be some opportunities for us to get engaged here. And he introduced me to the South Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture, a great guy named Hugh Weathers. And Hugh and his staff spent 3 years earlier, before I even met them, doing an analysis on exactly the things I just told you about in high-tech agriculture. They basically wrote a white paper on the value of high-tech agriculture, why South Carolina is really well positioned to be able to take advantage of it. And they were trying to find people who would be willing to take it from idea stage to actual, conception and practice. And this white paper was, it's funny, I've read it a couple of times. It is completely spot on. They nailed it to a T, and it took them years to do it. They went over to the Netherlands and looked at it. And so I credit Hugh Weathers and his team with the foresight to sit down, to research it, to write it. And in hindsight, every time I reread it, I'm like, yep, you guys nailed it. And I know you nailed it because I can take all those principles, I can directly put them back into Europe or see all the things that are wrong with our supply chains in the United States. And I'm like, man, that was so good. So that was the inspiration that started this whole process. We originally had a group backed by a really, really wealthy guy out of Florida, a multi-billionaire who wanted to do leafy greens. And then he pulled the plug on that project one day. We had a big groundbreaking announcement. Everybody was super excited. We were running towards design work, and he backed out of it because he was he's I don't know, he's probably worth $8 or $10 billion, and he was stressing over a couple $1,000,000 he had invested, and he just backed out on a whim.
Wow.
One day, which is totally his prerogative, but it blew up the deal, and we had to go back and find new partners, and that's when we came across this group, Harvest House, out of the Netherlands, and we've been racing to start construction for them since. So yeah,
Yeah.
kind of a roundabout story, but that's how it all happened. I credit it back to Hugh Weathers and his white paper.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I feel like you guys are capitalizing on a big opportunity. And you have broken ground yet, or you're about
We've done all
to?
the land clearing.
Got it.
So I got to let me think how much I want to or can
Yeah. Share
disclose.
what you want.
So we have our entire package is back at the USDA right now for final blessing.
Got it.
And as soon as that's approved, we can start construction. So we are, and man, someday I'm going to write a book about all the adversity that we ended up facing along the way. Like, my Lord, if I knew how complicated it was going to be, I mean, as a real estate developer, it's going to be
Yeah.
challenging at times. Like, all you do is solve problems. But I didn't realize when we started this, we were going to have doubling of interest rates. The USDA has been fantastic to work with, but they still come with there's some cumbersomeness to them, right? That you can't just say, oh, I want this. Like, they give these loan guarantees, which are really valuable, but they take a lot of time to get. You got to do a feasibility analysis and then an environmental analysis, and you got to get a bank that's willing to loan, because the USDA actually isn't the lender. They just give the loan guarantee. So you got to make sure you find the right lender, and then you got to be able to get a contract with another group that's helping. If the contract doesn't work, the general contractor doesn't work, we have a third party group that's willing to step in and basically act as a completion agent for
Mm.
for the lender, and so there's just all these parts, and every time I had one group that gave us a bid to do land clearing. Our land clearing bid is we originally budgeted, this first phase is a $66 million greenhouse project with a packing facility. Our land clearing, we budgeted about $5 million. We went out for bid and we got a bunch of bids that came in and they were like 10 million bucks. So it's double budget. And I'm like, all right, we've got some problems. And so I started digging through their bids and I'm like, a lot of this stuff just didn't make sense to me. So I call up a YPO colleague of mine who happens to be in the land clearing space, not in this area. And I said, hey, Sean, what would you do if you were in my shoes? He's like, call this one guy. So I pick up the phone and I call that one guy who runs a massive land clearing company all across the Southeast, who is not included in any of our bids. And within an hour of talking to him, he's like, yeah, I got capacity. He's like, let me help value engineer all this stuff out of here. So we spend about 2 months value engineering the civil work package that was put together. And sure enough, the bid comes in exactly as we originally budgeted. So had I gone with the original path, we'd be over budget on land clearing and site work. And we got one of the largest groups in the Southeast to do it at exactly the price we needed it to. But it came with a ton of hand holding and a ton of challenges. And, I think as I was reading Elon Musk's book, months ago, as I was going through all this stuff, I was like, I can relate to that, right? Like somebody comes to him and says, this rocket part needs to cost $1 million. He's like, that makes no sense. These parts, the aggregate of these parts, if you were to buy them in raw materials, would cost you $10,000. The labor can't be, $990,000. So if he just found himself asking questions to everybody, I had to go through that on our land clearing site work bidding process, and finally we got to the right place. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
How do you keep like a level head with all those situations? Because I know we're talking about Scotty Scheffler
good
at the beginning,
having
right?
having good partners. I mean,
Yeah.
trust me, we celebrate our wins, and I've got really, really smart, empathetic, like-minded people around me that I can commiserate with when we have tough days. And if you're in business, you're going to have wins and you're going to have tough days. So have people around you that you can talk about all the good and the bad. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there's any other
Yeah.
easy way other than you got to be able to talk about it with people, and they need to be, pretty much culturally aligned with you about, you talk about the good and you talk about the bad, and
Hmm.
you do it all together. So
Yeah. Yeah. I know you have, and you've kind of trickled them in there. You have like countless stories about how like YPO has impacted you and
mm,
having mentors around you. So I kind of have a two-part there. One, like I'd love for you to talk about YPO a little bit for the folks that may be listed that do qualify, because I know you're chairing. And then I'd love like the part two of that question be maybe for like the mid 20s that don't reach those requirements, but like how can you go ahead and start building out a network if you're maybe only worth like 100,000 bucks working at a corporate job, not running a company? Because I know YPO you have to have a couple requirements with the
yeah,
business
yeah,
and all
for
that.
sure.
So
But look, I mean, mentors are in. I cannot stress how valuable they are in the lives of young professionals who are interested in pursuing, increasing their career trajectories. So let's talk about that second. First, YPO it stands for Young Presidents Organization, for anybody who doesn't know what it is. I had a buddy of mine when I was growing up, his dad was in it. I was probably, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old, and all he talked about was these amazing experiences the YPO folks were going on. That's all I knew. I didn't know it. And yes, YPO chapters around the world. There's, I don't know, 60 chapters globally, maybe 80 chapters globally. Um, Tens of thousands of members representing, I think the number is about, I think we're up to like $9 trillion in
dang.
global revenue for YPO members around the world. I mean, it's significant. So you have to be a CEO or chairman of the board or managing director to qualify when there's certain criteria, but it's basically a peer group of CEOs. And um, their mission is to get together and have peer exchange. And that can be social, so getting together for cocktails and drinks, having fun. It can be education, bringing in world-class speakers so that you can hear from them on, all the things that are trends that are going on, or their stories and how they got to their positions of success and how they navigated challenges in any capacity. And it involves a lot of family events too,
Mm.
because, we're all not just individual CEOs. Like we're husbands and wives and fathers and mothers and sons and daughters, and so bringing all those pieces and treating kind of the totality of a person who's running a company, because it can be lonely at the top and you can't
Mm.
talk to a lot of people about the challenges you're facing because you're the head of an organization. And so, yeah, YPO has changed my life. My YPO colleagues are some of the best in the world. I wrote into when I got my first YPO qualifying job when I left Lilly and came and worked for the Swiss family. I wrote into my contract that they would sponsor me for YPO because I knew how valuable it would be for me. And I also remember what, the experiences, the fun stuff that my buddy was telling me about when I was a little kid, let alone the peer group that it would open me up to. So whenever I had a challenge or a problem, I could go to this group and talk about
Mm.
a family member with a substance abuse issue, or, I want to buy or sell a company, or I want to, I got an employee problem, or, gosh, I mean, everything that's going on in life, aging parents. There's always themes that make life challenging for folks. And YPO does a really good job of addressing all those things in a confidential setting where you can, share experiences and know that you're not alone in whatever journey you're going on. Odds are there's plenty of people around you who've been through that same journey. So,
Yeah.
for all those folks listening out there, if you ever are thinking about taking on a CEO job, write it into your contract
Mm.
that they should sponsor you for YPO. I promise you, it'll be one of the best organizations you've ever joined. So that was part one. Let's talk about mentors, right? Like, if wherever you are in the world, and my mentors end up being a lot of my YPO colleagues, but mentorship is so important. Um, when you're young and you're in a corporate structure, uh, if you've not raised your hand and asked for mentors, and I guess there's probably some companies where that would be maybe viewed kind of strangely, hopefully not shunned upon, but talk to your boss and say, hey, I'd really like to find a mentor or two that I can talk to about my career and additional education I should be considering, or training or advancement that's not your boss. Because your boss relationship is important, but you want to have an external perspective on this. Because there will also be times, and it's happened to me a bunch, where, when I was in corporate America, I wouldn't necessarily agree with my boss. So I could turn to some mentors inside the company and say, hey, what counsel do you have for me on this issue?
Mm.
And they could give me a independent third party perspective. But don't just get mentors inside your company. Like, go out and find them. Like, get involved in a nonprofit.
Mm.
Some of my best mentors have been, other board members at these nonprofits who are incredibly talented folks. One of my mentors was a guy named Brock Leach, and he was, like I said, the former CEO of Tropicana, and
Mm.
he taught me so much about how to think through problems, how to handle people, how to treat people with respect, how to, analyze things in a way that I never had. I just wouldn't have thought of, and Brock was fantastic at that. And of course, because he wouldn't have gotten to be CEO of Tropicana without having that sort of mindset. Um, Another one was a great man named Ken Pendry, founded the First Watch restaurant chain.
Mm.
We were at his memorial service last week in Sarasota, Florida, and Ken is, he and I would sit down when all that real estate stuff during the Great Recession was happening. Ken and I would sit down for breakfast at least once every couple of weeks and just talk about all the fun stuff and bad stuff that I was being challenged with, and he was being challenged with in our lives at the time. And we'd go play golf. Golf is a great game for folks. I'm a mediocre golfer. Actually, I'd just say, can I swear on this? I'm a shitty golfer,
Anything?
but
Yeah.
I love the game, because where else do you get, or I never have very many places to get 3, 4, 5 hours of, uh, you know, dedicated time with somebody to learn about what they're going through. And that's unique and really special. And Ken and I were able to go get that. So I got to watch this man grow this restaurant empire, and and along the way he would share nuggets of wisdom with me. Like, I mean, here's a great one. and I found this in the same Elon Musk book. Ken Pendry did this and told this to me 15 years ago. And he said, I asked him if, he's got this enormous restaurant chain he's growing around the country. I think today they're up to like 1,000 restaurants nationwide. And he was probably at like 300 or 400 at the time he's growing. And I was like, man, who does all your scheduling for you? Like, do you have an assistant that handles your calendar and like does all your travel and all that stuff? And he's like, nope. Like, what do you mean? No, you're a really busy guy, Ken. He's like, yeah, I'm the only one who knows where my priorities are. So I am the one who decides who I'm going to be talking to, how important, because that'll tell me how important that is. So nobody else can know the importance of that meeting more than me. So I will do my own scheduling, and I'm the only one who will book my flights because I know where I need to be at which restaurants at any given time. So nobody else is going to understand the importance of that. And sure enough, if you read the Elon Musk book or listen to it, there's this really funny interaction with Bill Gates where Bill Gates is like, hey, I want to come meet you and talk about philanthropy. Um, can I get my scheduling team in touch with your scheduling team? And Musk is like, yeah, they can just email me. And Bill Gates is like, wait, you don't have a team of folks? He's like, no, I do it all myself for the same reasons that Ken told me 15 years ago. And I was like,
Cool.
oh, it's so cool. So, small nuggets of wisdom like that, like nobody's going to know your time value better than you and where you want to drive your company. Then I got a great YPO friend of mine out of Atlanta, Brian. I won't use his last name. Anyway, he says he had a mentor tell him a couple years ago. He goes, "You show me someone's checkbook and their calendar, and I'll tell you what matters to them. So you show me where your time is being put and where your money is being put, and those are your priorities." And I think that's really good. So for Ken and for Elon, they were the ones who controlled their own calendar. And to date, I've never had anybody in my life ever control my calendar but me. So I've taken that to heart.
Yeah, I'm laughing at that story with Bill Gates and Elon Musk, and I think there's so many lessons there because it's like focus on what matters most and what you prioritize, and I love it. So
Yeah, and who knows it better than you in
yeah,
theory? Like you should, if you've got a good pulse of what's going on, like you should know I'm going to take this meeting because
yeah,
I got to solve this problem. It's so much more pressing than somebody else playing politics with my assistant trying to get me rammed into the account. Like there's
yeah,
just a lot of funny business can happen of when you've got assistants that are trying to control your calendar for you.
yeah. So when we schedule this, I sent you that like automation scheduling link. I'm
Oh, those are
obviously
great, right?
yeah,
Yeah, those are
but
fantastic.
but I used to have that for just like my regular calendar, and I would just float it out to people if they wanted a meeting with me, and then people kept like booking random meetings, and then I'm like, I'm only gonna use this for like podcast guests from now on because it
Oh,
was
it's
just
awesome. So,
filling up
Chris,
with
tell me
nothing.
about your mentors, right? Like mentorship is super important. Like
For
having
sure.
external perspective, guidance, like people you can turn to, like, hey, I'm thinking about a career change or going back and get my
Mm.
MBA or all that. Like, who are the mentors in your life and how'd you pick them and why?
Yeah, yeah. I have a couple that have just been on the podcast that I talk to every now and then. A lot of them are in the entrepreneurial space. There's a guy, Brian Miller, who's been a podcast guest. He was in the investment banking world, and then he went into the real estate development world. I don't necessarily want to go into real estate development, but the way he thinks about things, I love because he talks about like having self awareness and focusing on what actually matters and going down the path that's meant for you. Not, oh, I want to buy this house because it means I'm successful, but like, why do you want the things that you want? He really harps it on that. And he
Hmm.
thinks about things with a very like systematic perspective. Like I called him the other day and I was like, hey man, I really want to get this like Forerunner SUV. I could pay cash for it. Like I've been wanting it for a while. Should I just go ahead and pull the trigger? I know it's a depreciating asset. And then he kind of went through this checklist. He's like, well, is it a nice to have or a need to have? He's like, if it's a need to have, scale of 1 to 10, how bad do you need it? And then he just kind of went through this checklist. And I was like, I'm gonna wait till next year to buy the car. I'd rather put this in like an
He talked
index
you out
fund
of it
right
pretty
now.
quick, huh?
Yeah. And it was like, but it wasn't like, no, don't do that. It's stupid. It was more of like systematic checklist. And I was like, man, I didn't even think about like some of these questions that you were asking. So, but having that external validation is huge. And, when I switch roles, going from ad sales to tech sales, like how can I navigate that shift and all that stuff? And like he's been able to help me. But,
Oh, it's super important,
an
right?
hour of talking to him, is it saves me 10 hours of time because he helps me see 10 steps ahead of where I might be.
No doubt. And like to learn from people who have been there and can tell you, like, man, if you go down and choose this route, like I've been there and it comes with all these problems. So don't do that. Like instead of going down path A, go down path B. And having folks that are willing to give you that sort of time and counsel, it just saves, it's so valuable. And so anybody listening, if you don't have mentors, talk to your bosses, talk to your parents, talk to the people that you look up to, and and ask them that question. I mean, they're out there. Talk to your professors at school if that's something that's of interest.
Yeah.
I'd be a little careful. I mean, academia is different than like real world
Yeah.
experience. But if you don't have anybody else, like start somewhere and just grow your network. And and I think if you find that you're authentic with them, you don't overburden them with your questions. Most people are really excited to help young people be successful.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think as the young person, I always harp on like you have to show that you're actually like taking their advice. So I'll just email him like an update. Hey, I know you mentioned this a couple days ago. Just want to let you know here's the action that I took because I think the worst is like giving constant feedback to somebody and then they're never like running with it. And then not being afraid to give back. Like I'm sure you have a ton of people that you mentor. I have people that are like 21, 22, 23, just graduating that like I was in their shoes 6, 7 years ago that now I'm mentoring, but then I also have people that are like 35, 40 plus that are mentoring me. Fast forward 10 years down the road, I'll probably be mentoring people that are my age now. It's just how that system works. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I do, and I don't think you should ever stop.
yeah,
Like I kind of jokingly say, like I'll probably never stop working. I could hang it up and drink Mai Tais on the beach for the rest of my life if that's, you know, a, I'm not wired like that. And so I love watching people be successful. Not that and I'm certainly not the catalyst for a lot of those folks to do that, but I want to cheerlead them on. Like I liken it back to like playing golf with people. Like I can't help not cheer for you when you have a great shot. Like I want you to be successful.
yeah,
And surround yourself with other folks that are thinking like that. I mean, it does wonders. I have a good buddy who calls it high vibing. Like he's like, man, we're high vibing. Like we're putting good energy out there, and you want to surround yourself with people that are also putting good energy out there, and great things happen. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I got a closing question for you.
sure.
So, you talked about surrounding yourself with the right people, and we've talked about a ton, like having experience in different industries and what you can learn from others, and the complexities of business, and there's so much to unpack with what we covered. But what would your advice be to somebody who's like starting to get a little success and like they're really just trying to scale, right? Get up to that like multi-million-dollar level, maybe not this year, but 5, 6, 7 years down the road of let's create like some of that generational wealth, not just retire with 2 million, but hey, let's make decisions now to have 20, 30, 40 plus at age 50, 60 years old.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on some of it. I will
Yeah.
say finding a way to surround yourself with people who want nothing more from you than for you to be successful is meaning they don't want your money. They don't want you to buy anything from them. Uh, and that's hard. That's hard to find that group because oftentimes there are folks that, you know, they're thinking about business deals or opportunities. If you can find a group of folks, mentors, if you will, YPO creates that pretty organically. If you don't qualify for YPO, there are some great other groups called Vistage or EO. Um, but find people around you that you can talk to who don't want your money, so that when you're making decisions, you can say, I'm thinking about choosing path A here. And maybe they can share an experience about how they chose path A one time and either it worked out or they're going to recommend you choose path B because when they went down path A, they ran into all these hurdles and stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
So, surround yourself with good people. I mean, gosh, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about all the other,
Yeah.
like the granularities around what you should do when you're starting to get success. Stay humble.
Mm.
The world, I don't know if it's karma or energy or God or whatever word you want to use, but every time in my life when I've, been like, man, I'm really, I'm crushing it. Like karma comes along and thumps you one pretty good, and you're like, yep, all right, well, maybe I should have been a little more humble, shared some humility around that instead of going out there talking about how uh, awesome I was or how successful we were this year. Let's, you know, take it with a little more perspective. And yeah, so the world sometimes just naturally knocks people down when they think they're really, hitting on all cylinders, and that's kind of life. So stay humble out there and work hard. I mean, I read in your bio, right? Like the two things you can control are your attitude and your work ethic.
Mm.
100%. Like you show up every day and you got a shitty attitude and you don't work hard at work, like you better be a savant. You better be like, and by the way, Elon Musk is one of the hardest workers out there. But he's borderline what's his disease? Asperger's, right? He's
Yeah.
borderline Asperger's, but that man is so smart. He's, like you better be that smart if you're going to show up and you're going to be lazy or you're going to be a jerk or any of that stuff. Like you better show up and be magnificently talented in certain other areas for anybody to tolerate you, because odds are you're not going to make it. You can show up, work hard, be engaged, be authentic, admit when you're wrong. uh, what are some, I tell some other folks, Chris, like, I think it's really good for a young person to work for a shitty boss.
Mm.
That's normally not like, that may not make sense right off the bat, but because I think you have to work for somebody. If you're going to ever be a boss, you need to feel like, this is not my style. I feel like this is what bad is, so that you can go and then do something and never do that to somebody else unless you absolutely have to. So I think working for a bad boss, a bad cultural fit in an organization so that you can go be a good boss, create a good cultural fit in an organization. I think that's really important. So yeah, we covered a lot of ground. Look,
Yeah.
I would say I'm like a little hesitant to like share my email address, but I will say if anybody through you ever wants to reach out to me,
Yeah.
just like forward me their emails if they ping you. And I don't have a ton of time. I'm finishing up our YPO chapter tier year, but like I'd love to talk to people and help them if they're thinking through business challenges or whatnot. I'll do what I can. I don't, I'll do what I can. I do what I
For
can.
sure.
I love the work you're doing, and hopefully people are continue to be inspired by your podcast. And I'm blessed to be able to join you. So that's great.
Yeah, man, this was a great conversation. I'm fired up after this. I took a ton of notes, so I mean, I'm gonna go crush the rest of my week, and I know everyone else that was listening will. So again, Zeb, thank you so much, man, for being on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Chris, real pleasure, and talk to you soon. And stay after it. All right.
Absolutely.